I've set my calculation based on this form. So basically I weighed the sample, and based on the optimum moisture content, I measured the water that I needed, and I'm gonna mix the sample per optimum moisture content. But before that, I'll put the porous stones in the vacuum to prepare them. So this is the vacuum pump. I'm gonna just put the porous stones in the vacuum pump and turn it on. Make sure that the vacuum, the suction out of the pump is connected to this hose on this machine. Because earlier it was used in another test. And close it for now. Okay, so now I'm gonna measure the water that I need. Usually just put the beaker on the scale and tare it. And then fill it up with the water that I need, which is 452 grams. I'm gonna mix the soil to the water content. I'm just having a little allergy, so I'm gonna put on the dust mask, because the fine particles in the soil trigger my allergy. Okay, so mixing the soil to the water content. This water, I'm just gonna, in my head, I'm gonna divide it into 3 portions. This way you make sure that the soil is mixed homogeneously with the water. So I've added the first portion of water and I've mixed it thoroughly. This is how it's supposed to look like after you mix it thoroughly. It's all consistent. There's no darker places than other places. Okay. Now I'll add the second portion. And mix again. So I've added the second portion. I've also mixed thoroughly. This is how it's supposed to look like. You can see the color is consistent, and you can also feel that the moisture is also consistent throughout my tray. I'll add the last portion evenly and also mix thoroughly. Now I'm going to prepare the mold for compaction. This is the split mold that I'm going to prepare. I'm just basically going to apply vacuum grease to this, and then apply the membrane, and put the porous stone and the filter paper on it, and then close the mold on it so that it's ready for compaction. want to make sure to pay attention to this orifice because its orientation is gonna fit in the triaxial cell. I'm just gonna take out the porous stone from the vacuum pump, place it here. And the filter water and the filter paper, I'll dip it in water and place it on top of it. This is to make sure that the soil particles do not enter the base plate and clog it. I'll put the membrane around the base plate like this. This clamp is to hold the split mold together. Also make sure you pay attention to the orientation, because if you put it in another way, it's gonna not fit in the triaxial cell. So the screw and the clamp has to be facing between these two plates in the middle, and also in the direction where that hose is. Close it. And then apply the O-ring. This O-ring is going to hold the membrane to the base plate. Also make sure we notice that the orifice is on this side, so that the suction hose and the nut here are supposed to be facing the same direction. I'm gonna slide it here and lower the O-ring. It's just gonna snap on the membrane. Then pull the membrane from the inside, pull it up, and get the other clamp. It's also supposed to be facing the same direction, and tighten it so that it holds the membrane together. Okay, after I set up the mold and measured it, I'm just gonna connect the vacuum to suck the membrane. Make sure it's sucked to the walls of the mold. We're gonna do 8 lifts. Each lift we're gonna put it, compact it, and then put the next lift. So I have my bowl, I'll tear the scale. And I also make sure that my sample is mixed so that I take all the sizes of the gradation in each scoop. When you're pouring it in, make sure you do half of it from one direction of the sample and then do the other half from another angle so that you make sure all the big aggregates are not stacked in just one side. When you're done, just make sure that the larger sizes are distributed around the perimeter of the Now we've set the speed on the compaction hammer. We start compacting. We make sure that the hammer is completely vertical on the sample and don't apply pressure to it, just leave it on its own weight. That's it. After each lift, I just take measurements from the top and make sure that each lift is even and I didn't over compact or under compact. The first lift looks okay, and it's even on all sides. Each lift you have to stratify it to make sure that the lifts are not isolated from each other. It's supposed to measure 15 millimeters from the top. It's perfect. So now after I'm done compacting the sample, I'll measure the mold with the compacted sample to get the density. Okay, now after the last lift is done, I'm gonna put the porous, the filter paper on the sample, and then I'll get the top plate. I'll get the porous stone from the vacuum pump, place it in the groove, then place the top plate. Also make sure that this is facing this way, like the orifice that was under and in exactly in between those two clamps. And we'll make sure it's even. Good. And remember that orifice we mentioned, it should fit right on this. So I'll take out the split mold. First unscrew the clamps. Put a plug into the drainage orifice. Open the vacuum valve. Open the vacuum valve right here and close the other two drainage valves and turn on the vacuum pump. Take out the split mold. Before I put the second membrane, I just attach the screws to the base plate and screw them on, because sometimes the second membrane get folded on top of here and makes it hard to put the screws in. To put the second membrane on the sample, we need to use the membrane stretcher. first I need to put the O-rings on this membrane stretcher. I always use this empty plastic bottle to fit the O-rings in here. You can do it without it, but it's easier with the bottle. Now that it's good, apply pressure to it. Apply vacuum to it. That's going to be tight around the cylinder, and it can fit on top of the sample. Now since the sample is set, I'll just assemble the triaxial cell. First I'll put the lower LVDTs on. Since those LVDTs don't measure as accurate from their first range of motion, so I always want them to be compressed a little, but not too much because they have a short range of motion. So what I always do, I put the plate, the measuring plate on top first to see where my LVDTs are at. Always like to keep them this groove be aligned with the top of the sample so that they have enough compression to start reading accurately. When I'm comfortable with the position, I'll just screw them on. Tighten them. But don't tighten too strong because this is aluminum and the screws are steel and they can ruin your thread. So this is done. I'll put the piston rod, screw it on the top plate. When you put this measuring plate on, make sure it's on the right side that says top. Otherwise, it's going to give you a false reading because it's slightly bent this way so that the piston will tighten it. Then after this is set, I'll put the upper LVDTs on. Just like the lower ones, they need to be slightly lifted, but not too much. Those have way much lower range of motion. They need to be just a tiny bit. Before you go with the next step, I always make sure to plug in the LVDTs in their data acquisition. Otherwise you might forget it and close your triaxial cell and start the test and then remember that they're not plugged. And also take off this plug and insert the drainage hose. This drainage hose is connected to these two. Right now they're closed to allow the vacuum to suck the membrane into the sample. Now this is set. I'll put the cell. I'll close the cell. Make sure you be careful because the slightest hit on this quartz on a metal can break it. Make sure you have all your wires inside. Double check around it. Make sure it's not pinching anything. Then we'll put the top part of the triaxial cell and close it down. This is the part that holds the pressure in the cell inside. So before I screw it in, I always make sure I close this valve and open the air pressure and pay attention to the hissing sound to make sure I closed it tightly. And I tighten the screws in an alternating fashion, just like in a car wheel. hissing sound went away. That means it's sealed. I'll go ahead and close the air pressure valve. And now the cell is set. Make sure I connect the pressure transducer, the pressure transducer to the data acquisition, and turn on the data acquisition system and the control panel to start the hydraulics. Now I open the offset calibration program that make sure it's all the sensors are starting from 0. So before I run it, I make sure that all the connections are connected and nothing is loose. Then I click run on the offset calibrations. It takes a few seconds, maybe 14 seconds, until it sets off and asks you to stop. Okay. Then it'll prompt you to replace the old readings with the existing zeroed sensors. Okay, now that this is zeroed, I minimize it, and now I use the control panel to lift the piston up so that I can put my sample under the testing, under the load plate. I go down to interlock status because there's a safety measure that it's triggered right now. I need to take it off so that I can bring the piston to go up. Now it's on off. I just put it on low first. Oh, that, yeah. High hydraulic pressure to lift it up faster, but make sure I don't keep it on high all the way because it can get jammed on the top. Now since it's high enough, push the sample under it, make sure it's aligned. After I make sure it's aligned, I make sure it's on low pressure here on the control. And I double check my connections again, and I make sure I entered the right data on the testing program. Make sure I have the naming done right and all of that so that it doesn't oversave on another sample. And also I make sure before I click run, I make sure that the setting is on preload, not testing. Okay, before you click run, before you click test, make sure that the confined pressure, the air pressure is open, the vacuum is closed, the 2 draining valves are open. Otherwise, your sample is gonna compress severely. So now you're ready to start testing. So now after the sample is set and the piston is perfectly aligned on it, the testing is running right now on preload, which means it's not loading, it's just triggering the piston to go down on the sample. I just want to make sure that the safety measures are done. I go to home, go down to limit levels, and I make sure that AC load, this limits how low the piston can go. And since the sample, the piston right now, the position right now, it's 12 millimeters. And I know my samples, I don't want it to compress more than 10 millimeters. I go to limit levels. 12 minus 10 is 2 millimeters, but just to give it a little more room, I set it on 0 right now. And then go back to interlock status. I disabled it earlier to allow the piston to go up. Now I put it on enable, and then everything is set. I just click run. It's running. I just click test on the testing program. It's gonna take a while, and then it's gonna start doing the repeated cyclic loading on the sample.